You're lying to yourself. And not just about small, everyday things. You're constructing a fundamental lie about who you are and how the world works. And the worst part, you're paying for this lie. Literally, you buy books, courses, apps, therapies, coaches, all promising that you can transform yourself, that you can control your life, that you can be happy if you just follow the right steps. Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian philosopher, who looks like he stepped out of a Kafkaesque nightmare, looks at this billion-dollar self-help industry and laughs. It's not a laugh of contempt. It's the laugh of someone who sees a cosmic joke being told to an audience that doesn't realize it is the joke. But before you get comfortable thinking, oh, another elitist intellectual criticizing people who just want to improve their lives, stop. Because Zizek's critique isn't about you being naive or stupid for seeking self-help. The critique is much deeper, much more disturbing. It's about how our very quest for personal improvement has become the perfect mechanism for perpetuating exactly what oppresses us. Self-help isn't just ineffective, it's actively destructive. And you need to understand why. Because when you understand, you'll realize something terrible. That maybe you don't really want to change. Maybe you just want the illusion of change. And this realization will completely transform how you see your own life. We're about to descend into the basement of modern consciousness, where we'll discover that our most sincere desires for personal transformation might be exactly what keeps us trapped. Prepare yourself, because this won't be a comfortable journey. To understand why Zizek considers self-help a fundamental lie, we first need to understand what he calls the perverse ideology of late capitalism. Don't worry about the jargon. The idea is simple and brutal. We live in a system that simultaneously tells us two contradictory things: be yourself and constantly change to fit in. Self-help emerges as the supposed solution to this impossible contradiction. It promises that you can be authentic and successful, genuine and productive, true to yourself, and perfectly adapted to market demands. But here's the perverse trick. Self-help works by turning your own dissatisfaction into a product. Your anxiety, your depression, your feeling of inadequacy. All of this becomes raw material for an industry that profits by keeping you in a perpetual state of almost getting there. Zizek points to something that should be obvious, but that our culture actively works to hide. If self-help methods really worked, the self-help industry should be shrinking, not growing exponentially. If Dale Carnegie's books really solve the problems they promise to solve, why do we need new self-help books every week? The answer isn't that the methods are imperfect and being refined. The answer is that the very act of seeking self-help has become an addiction, a compulsion that replaces real action with the fantasy of action. Think about how many times you've bought a self-help book, felt a wave of hope and motivation reading it, maybe even implemented some techniques for a few weeks, and then went back to exactly where you were. Not because you're weak or undisciplined, but because the book never had the real intention of solving your problem. Its function was to make you feel good enough to keep functioning in the system that created the problem in the first place. But Zizek's analysis goes even deeper. He argues that self-help represents a particularly insidious form of what he calls enlightened cynicism. You know you're being manipulated. You know these promises are exaggerated. You know there's no silver bullet for fundamental human problems. And yet you continue consuming self-help. Why? Because enlightened cynicism allows you to maintain your illusions while feeling intellectually superior for recognizing they are illusions. You buy the book knowing it probably won't work, but buying it anyway, just in case. This attitude protects you from disappointment. because you already expected it wouldn't work, and from real responsibility for change because you didn't truly invest in the possibility. Self-help thus becomes a perfect mechanism for existential procrastination. You feel like you're working on yourself, like you're growing and evolving, when you're actually just consuming fantasies of growth and evolution. And here we reach the heart of Zizek's critique. Self-help doesn't just fail to solve real problems. It actively prevents us from confronting these problems. Because confronting real problems means recognizing that many of our sufferings aren't personal defects we can fix, but structural consequences of how our society is organized. Your anxiety isn't a bug in your personal operating system. It's a rational response to a genuinely anxious world. Your depression isn't a chemical failure that can be hacked with gratitude and positive thinking. It's an understandable reaction to a depressing reality. Your feeling of emptiness and lack of purpose isn't a personal development deficiency. It's the predictable result of living in a culture that has turned every aspect of human experience into a commodity. Now let's make this personal, because that's exactly what you need to do. Make this analysis personal, not intellectual, not academic, personal. How many self-help books have you read? How many courses have you taken? How many hours have you spent watching motivational videos, listening to productivity podcasts, reading posts about mindfulness and personal development? I'm not asking to judge you. I'm asking so you recognize a pattern. Now answer me. Have you fundamentally changed? Not superficially. I'm not talking about acquiring some new habits or breathing techniques. I'm talking about real, deep, lasting change. Have you become a fundamentally different person through self-help? If the answer is no, you have two options. Either you conclude that you haven't found the right method yet and keep searching, or you consider the possibility that the problem isn't in the methods, but in the premise itself. Zizek suggests that our obsession with self-help reveals something disturbing about how we understand the human condition. We have completely internalized market logic. If something isn't working in your life, it must be because you're not using the right tool, not following the right strategy, not applying the right method. But what if the problem isn't methodological? What if the very idea that you can optimize yourself like a machine is fundamentally wrong? Let's talk about your smartphone for a moment. How many times a day do you check it? How many productivity, meditation, exercise, and personal development apps do you have installed? Your phone has become an extension of your self-help project, a portable laboratory for personal improvement experiments. But notice the irony. The same device you use to improve yourself is also the device that's actively deteriorating your ability to concentrate, your sleep quality, your interpersonal relationships, and your connection to the physical world. You're using the poison as the antidote. This isn't accidental. The design of self-help apps replicates exactly the same addictive mechanisms as social media. Intermittent rewards, constant feedback, gamification of progress. You're not healing from technology addiction. You're being addicted to a healthy version of the same system. And here's where Zizek's analysis becomes really disturbing. What if our constant need for self-help is exactly what the system wants from us? What if keeping you in a perpetual state of working on yourself is the perfect way to prevent you from questioning the system that's creating the need for this work? Think about how many hours you've spent worrying about your personal productivity. Now, think about how many hours you've spent questioning why we live in a culture obsessed with productivity. Think about how much time you've dedicated to trying to control your anxiety. Now, think about how much time you've dedicated to questioning why our society produces anxiety on an industrial scale. Self-help functions as a gigantic distraction operation. While you're busy trying to hack your brain, optimize your morning routine, and develop a growth mindset, you're not questioning why your work is alienating, why your relationships are superficial, why you live in constant competition with other people, why you feel empty, despite having more access to information and entertainment than any previous generation. But perhaps the most brutal revelation is this. What if you don't really want to change? What if all this self-help seeking is a sophisticated way of avoiding real change? Real change is scary, painful, unpredictable. It requires you to give up control, accept uncertainty, confront aspects of yourself and the world that you'd rather ignore. It's much easier to buy a book promising 7 steps to transform your life than to confront the fact that maybe you need to give up things you think you want, question beliefs that are fundamental to your identity, or accept that some aspects of the human condition are inherently problematic and have no solution. Self-help offers the fantasy of change without the real risks of change. It allows you to feel progressive while staying exactly where you are. So we arrive at the moment of truth. If Zizek is right, if self-help is really a fundamental lie, what's left? If we can't improve ourselves through techniques and methods, are we doomed to stagnation? If we can't control our experience through psychological strategies, are we at the mercy of chaos? This is where Zizek's philosophy becomes not just critical, but radically liberating. Because when you stop trying to control uncontrollable aspects of human experience, you finally become free to act where real action is possible. The first thing you need to accept is that you cannot become an optimized version of yourself. There is no version 2.0 of you waiting to be unlocked through the right techniques. You are a fundamentally contradictory, inconsistent, limited creature. And this isn't a bug that needs to be fixed. It's an essential feature of the human condition. When you stop spending energy trying to solve the equation of yourself, you can finally direct it toward things that actually matter. Instead of trying to optimize your personal productivity, you can question why our culture is obsessed with productivity. Instead of trying to control your anxiety, you can investigate the social conditions that produce the anxiety. Instead of trying to hack your happiness, you can consider whether the pursuit of individual happiness isn't part of the problem. Zizek isn't proposing nihilism. He's proposing something much more radical. Authenticity. Not the trademarked authenticity of self-help. Be yourself. But real authenticity. The courage to exist without justification, without optimization, without the promise of constant improvement. This means accepting that you'll continue having bad days, that you'll continue making mistakes, that you'll continue being inadequate in various situations. But it also means you can stop spending mental and emotional energy trying to solve these problems and direct it toward real engagement with the world. And here's the final paradox. When you stop trying to constantly improve yourself, you often improve naturally. Not because you applied a technique, but because you stopped interfering with organic processes of growth and adaptation. When you stop trying to control your anxiety, it often diminishes, not because you beat it, but because you stopped feeding it with constant resistance. When you stop trying to optimize your relationships, they often improve, not because you applied communication strategies, but because you're finally present in them, instead of constantly evaluating and adjusting. When you stop trying to be more productive, you often become more effective, not because you found the perfect system, but because you stopped spending energy on systems and directed it toward real work. But perhaps the deepest liberation is this. When you accept that you can't completely control yourself, you finally become free to respond authentically to situations. Instead of always asking what's the optimized response, swing. You can ask, what's my genuine response? This doesn't mean irresponsibility or impulsiveness. It means real responsibility. Because when you're no longer trying to be the better version of yourself, you can finally be responsible for the real version. And this is where Žižek connects with much older philosophical traditions. The Stoics, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, never talked about personal optimization. They talked about radical acceptance of what can be changed and decisive action on what can be changed. They didn't promise you'd be happy if you followed their teachings. They promised you'd be free. The difference is fundamental. Happiness is a transitory emotional state that depends on external circumstances. Freedom is an existential orientation you can maintain regardless of circumstances. When you stop seeking self-help and start seeking real self-knowledge, not knowledge about how to optimize yourself, but knowledge about who you really are underneath all the layers of optimization, something fundamental changes. You stop being a project and become a person. You stop being a problem to be solved and become an experience to be lived. You stop being a consumer of solutions and become a creator of meaning. And maybe, in the end, this is self-help's biggest lie. The idea that you need help to be yourself. You don't. You never did. You just need the courage to stop trying to be someone else. The most radical truth Žižek offers isn't that self-help doesn't work. It's that you already work. Not perfectly, not optimally, not according to some guru or coach's standards. But you work as a real human being, with real limitations, real contradictions, and real possibilities. And when you finally accept this, when you stop trying to fix yourself and start experiencing yourself, something extraordinary happens. You discover that real life, not the optimized version you were trying to create, but the real version you were trying to avoid, is much more interesting, much richer, and much more authentic than any personal improvement fantasy could be. Self-help is a lie. But you are devastatingly, uncontrollably, magnificently real. And maybe it's time to start acting from that reality, instead of trying to escape it. The question is no longer, how can I improve myself? The question is, how can I live authentically with who I really am? And this question has no prefabricated answer, can't be solved with techniques, isn't available in online course format. It can only be answered through the experience of living. And that, fortunately, is something you already know how to do.